It's now time to move on over to women empowerment. The host of this popular segment is popular himself. His name is none other than Dr. Shambhu BANIK. Today, Dr. BANIK's guest is a famous author, Mrs. VIERA Masih, who actually hosts her own show on Colours of India called Insidious Epidemic. Let's catch her on the screen of Women's Worldview along with Dr. BANIK for now.
Good morning. On behalf of Global Television Networks, Women in Worldview, Women's Empowerment Program, this morning in our studio we have an outstanding author of a book called Mahima, and she also a medical nuclear technologist in Johns Hopkins University, Mrs. VIERA Gossai. Mrs. Gossai, welcome to Global Television Network's Women's Worldviews Women Empowerment Program.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Now, I understand you have written an interesting book called Mahima. Could you tell our viewers about the contents and some of the highlights of your book?
This book, Mahima, was written a long time ago. Initially, it was written in Hindi language. Then I decided to translate it into English.
Okay.
So talking about the contents of the book, this book has 3 segments. A memoir, a true story of a girl called Mahima. Basically, my intentions were not to write a book about Mahima, but about Mahimas of the world. So the first segment is her childhood, how she grew up in a loving family, a large loving family, youngest child of 6. And her growing up, a story is written here. Then the story of her youth when she went to college, when she went to graduate school. And also the second segment contains her first love and her relationships, not issues, the stories, very sentimental stories. And the third part contains when she got married, and her marriage was partially arranged marriage, and what kind of abuses, domestic abuses, she experienced or faced in her married life, and how she coped with them, and how long she stayed in that marriage. And it's written reflects very clearly.
So this book, Mahima, deals primarily with the aspects of, you call the domestic violence, correct?
Yes.
So what is domestic violence?
The domestic violence is such a wide range. Physical abuse is number 1, domestic violence. And then comes, the secondary part of the domestic violence which comes after physical abuse could be, and most of the times it is, the emotional and mental violence, which is basically, I was speaking in my segment about the short-term impacts of the domestic violence. In the beginning, she faced physical violence, and in its time, when the physical violence was stopped, then her husband started using other tricks, emotional violence, and putting her down.
Can you elaborate a little bit of what you mean by emotional violence?
Emotional violence means like psychological impacts of the negativity in the house. If you do this, I will do that. I will kick you out of the house. And threats, basically threats. And I would also say that the emotional violence was also as an after effect of the physical violence, which is talked in this book. And also how she managed, how she coped, and how she ended her wedding. So that's the contents of the book.
Do you also include sexual violence and economic violence in your book?
Yes, I did include that in brief. Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, what is the background of this Mahima that she has to live in that abusive circumstances? couldn't she get out from this abusive circumstances?
This is such a good question. But the answer to the question, in my knowledge, is it is never ever easy to break a relationship or get out of the relationship. There are several fears. Number one is the uncertain future. And not number one, but it's one of the fear we have. And like we are away from our families, we don't have any counseling from our families and friends. And this is not an easy issue to talk about. It's not easy to talk to anyone about what is happening within your house, within the boundaries of your house. So, and the other thing was, there is always hope that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And that hope stayed in Mahima for years and years and years. And then children come into the picture. When children come into the picture, then it's basically impossible to take any action, because then you have fear of children growing up. If they grow up with their father, what will happen? If they grow up with mother, will they be able to get quality care? Raising up, going to school, financial. There are several factors, factor of fear. So that's what kept Mahima for several years in that marriage.
Mrs. Gossai, this story of Mahima, did it take place in India or in this country?
Well, as I told you, the beginning, this has three segments. Childhood was in India, the youth was in India. Mahima got married when Mahima came here to this country. So her marriage took place in this country. And
so
her
the
married life was
took place during the marriage.
As a matter of fact, it's written in Mahima also that, as a matter of fact, the abuse took place a little bit before marriage.
Oh, okay.
After the engagement.
Oh, after the engagement.
There is a very sentimental segment here about that episode.
Okay, now you mentioned about that the family counseling in this country. In every society, in every county, they have got counseling centers, they have got all the help is available there. No? So why Mahima did not take advantage of all the services in this country?
As a matter of fact, there is a long chapter about Mahima going to counseling. Mahima did not go to counseling one time, two times. Mahima went to counseling several times. But in my opinion, counseling has to be done for both, not for one. If the other partner is not willing, not admitting the fault, then counseling is basically useless. But yes, Mahima tried counseling several times.
Did several times. Okay, now as you talked about the domestic violence, is it only applicable to women or is it only applicable to men also?
Well, as a matter of fact, when I was talking about my 4 segments I presented, I gave some statistics to my viewers. In this country, it's all over the globe. 15% cases are men abused by women, and 85% cases are women abused by men. But again, those cases and that percentage does not really talk much, because several cases are not even reported. But yes, there is men abuse also by women.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned about the children. Now, how the children are affected by the domestic violence?
Children, if they are the first witness, they see what is happening in their house. When they are little, they know that there is unpleasantness in the house. And our children are pretty smart. They keep those things. As a matter of fact, the outcome of domestic violence is such a ripple effect. It affects the children growth, their education, and their future. Yes, it does. So if we say, yes, our children are not affected, we are not accepting the fact and the truth.
Now, I have not read your book, Mahima, yet, but in your book, did you mention about the influence of the in-laws in marriage?
Yes, I did.
Tell us, your viewers, about how the in-laws play into the domestic violence business.
The thing is, if the in-laws are very concerning, they can be your counselors. But in this case, they were not. Their thing is like, what is the big deal about it happens everywhere? my husband did this to me, so if your husband does this, it's not a big deal. Just forgive and forget. That's the simple thing, 2 words which are very hard to follow. So those kind of advices were given, but yes, and also the blood is blood and water relation, you know, it's a different. So the daughter-in-laws are secondary. So yes, I wrote a little bit about the in-laws, help or not help, you know, in this book, but basically it's about the about Mahima's husband and Mahima's relationship in the 3rd segment.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
Now, as you talked about domestic violence, can you suggest some of the measures how to prevent domestic violence in Indian family?
That is such a tough question, and unfortunately, I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, but prevention.
Now, from your experiences.
Yeah, prevention should be done before it happens. So in my opinion, I would say the families play important role. The marriages, I am very against forceful arranged marriages. So one has to be very careful when they arrange their children's marriage. They have to give them time to know each other.
Okay.
So that is one prevention, and the other prevention is that we are talking prevention means before it happens. Oh my goodness, I really don't have any straight answer for that.
That's okay. Now that we are coming very close to that, you did mention before that you have got some important message to communicate to our viewers, well, concluding remarks, you know.
Yes, yes.
Now it is the time to, I have got 2 minutes, so you have got 220 seconds to cover that. You know?
Okay, I will finish it 219 seconds. How about that?
That's great.
Okay, this is the epilogue section of my book. And it's basically, as I told you in the beginning, Mahima is not the story of Mahima, it is the story of Mahimas. So I will just read a couple of lines just to make you familiar with the book. And it says, it's continuation from the last chapter. It says, and a marriage of 24 years was dissolved. Thus ended this phase of Mahima's journey. One could change the number of years, and this statement is repeated ad infinitum in our society as thousands of marriages dissolve daily. Marriages end, but why they end, and the circumstances that lead to end the marriage, what form the narrative of pain and brokenness. Mahima's story invites the reader to ponder on the nature of meaning of marriage and indeed relationships. When is a marriage not a marriage? Is it the case that a ceremony, the rituals, constitute a marriage? Is love the essential foundation of marriage? Trust, commitment, promise of fidelity, mutuality, companionship and partnership, loyalty.
Great. Okay. My last question to you. This week, India Abroad, there is a story that India needs more divorces because many women, because of the social pressure, do not want to go through the divorce process because they go through all the domestic violence and all the abuses, you know. What's your comment on that?
I have a strong comment about that. In this country, there are 50% divorces. In India, the statistic says 0%. I do not believe that number. First of all, the marriages in India are different. Second, the cases are not reported. Thirdly, like you said, the women stay in the marriage as they are their husband's property, and there are financial distress, several reasons, so they do not go for divorces. But I have seen cases where people separate illegally and they just are out of the marriage, if it's like an abusive marriage.
Well,
but
thank you.
Legally, it's not divorce.
Thank you, VIERA Gossai, for sharing such an important issue, burning issue, facing not only the Indian American community, the entire global community about the domestic violence and the abuse against women and female children. So thank you for shedding some lights on that.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. Thank you so much, and so nice to see you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.